Faith isn't the same as certainty. Now, I want to draw a distinction here. I think that our culture has collapsed to our great cost. I think the distinction between what I'm referring to as faith and what I'm referring to as certainty, these aren't the same thing. In fact, I would argue that they're closer to the opposites. Chernobyl, the Titanic, the Challenger, the Columbia disaster, Deepwater Horizon. What do all of these have in common? I'll tell you in a few moments. But before I do, let me add one more disaster to that short list. The reason your son no longer talks to you. The reason your daughter unfollowed you. The reason your oldest friend stopped answering your texts. Stay with me. Because the explosion and the iceberg and the O-ring and the foam strike and the blowout and the silence on the other end of the phone, they're all coming from the same place. Today I want to talk to you about the most expensive feeling in the human experience. The feeling that you are right. I'm Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. This is The Meaning Mindset. For the next half hour, I want to walk you through this one idea. It doesn't cost money. It doesn't require a degree. It doesn't even take that much courage, though it does take a little. And the idea, it's an idea that if you take it seriously, could save your relationships, could prevent future disasters, could actually improve your health, could extend your life, and possibly keep your name off the kind of list I just read to you. It's called intellectual humility. And I want to start by telling you about a cab ride. The cabbie and the pitcher, we'll call it. In June of 2011, a major league pitcher named Wade LeBlanc, some of you know him if you're followers of baseball, well, he was having the worst stretch of his career. I read about this in Psychology Today, an article called The Certainty Trap. He'd been bouncing around the league, early promise eroding. He was back with the team that had originally drafted him, the San Diego Padres. And the night before the morning I'm about to tell you about, he had pitched really, really badly. The next morning, he hailed a taxi to take him to the airport. He was being demoted, sent down to the minor league affiliate in Tucson. Now, I want you to picture this. You're a professional athlete. You're 27 years old. You've just had a career-defining bad night. You're being shipped out. You're sitting in the back of a cab, earbuds probably nearby, and all you want is to disappear into the upholstery for the next 20 minutes, or how long it takes to get to that airport. And the driver looks up in the rearview mirror, and he says, "Hey, I watched the game last night," in whatever accent he says it. "You've got some good stuff," he says, "but you know what I think you should try?" Now, imagine that. He says, bringing your hands over your head in the windup. A cab driver just gave a major league pitcher pitching advice. Now, what would you have done in that moment? Most of us, and I include myself, would have managed a polite thanks. We would have nodded. We would have put the earbuds in our ears. We would have taken out the phone and started scrolling or switched to noise canceling, because what does a cabbie know about pitching? Wade LeBlanc didn't do that. What makes the story remarkable and instructive is he listened. And when he reported for duty in Tucson the next day, he walked up to his pitching coach and he said, "Hey, there's something I want to try. What if I brought my hands over my head in the windup?" His next start, he tried it. He pitched 7 innings, 1 run, no walks, lights out. He used that technique, that cab driver's tip, for the rest of his career. I'm not telling you this story because of baseball in particular. Honestly, I don't know that much about baseball. I'm telling you this story because Wade LeBlanc displayed something in the back of that cab at probably the lowest moment of his professional life that I think most of us rarely encounter in ourselves. You could call it athletic. You could call it spiritual. The Talmud has a name for it. Who really wants advice? 2,000 years ago, the rabbis asked a simple question. Ezehu hachacham? Ezehu hachacham? Who is wise? And the answer they give is not the one who knows the most. It's not the most learned. It's not the one with the highest IQ. It's not the one who reads the most books. The answer they give is halomed mikol adam, the one who learns from every person, the cab driver, the teenager at the cash register, the neighbor whose politics you can't stand, the relative who has never made a single decision that you would have made. The wise person, the rabbis say, doesn't filter out whom they're willing to learn from. The wise person assumes that there's something to be learned from anyone they meet. Now, let's just be honest with each other. Who really lives that way? I don't, not consistently. By default, and I think this is the human default, we fall downward in our defenses and in our certainties, and we hear advice and our ego flinches and the body tightens and the eyebrows go up and the internal monologue starts. Who do you think you are? You don't know my situation. You don't know my sport. You don't know my expertise. You don't have it. I've been doing this, whatever this is. Maybe it's just being a husband, a wife, a human, longer than you've been alive. So we push back. We push back at the risk of missing what could be genuinely game-changing advice or life-changing advice. Who among us actually wants advice? Be honest. We want validation. We want agreement. We want to be told we're doing it right. Advice is just validation's annoying older sibling. Advice walks into the room and says, actually, here's what you could be doing differently. And we say, thank you. And we mean, go away. This right here is where the trap closes, because the moment we stop being willing to learn from anyone, we become incapable of growing from everyone. The wisdom door swings shut. And from that point forward, we're running on whatever we already know, whatever we already believe, whatever we already are certain about. The architecture of certainty. Let's just consider that for a moment. So why are we so attached to being right? Some years ago, I came across a book by the UCLA professor Barry Schwartz. Might be familiar to some of you. It's called The Paradox of Choice. And in it, Schwartz makes an argument that sounds counterintuitive, but turns out to be deeply true. Too many choices makes us miserable. Too many choices make us miserable. You know this. You've lived it. Open a closet to a 3-year-old and ask her which of a dozen dresses does she want to wear. And you've just ratcheted up that little girl's stress for the entire morning. But narrow it down, yellow, pink, or other pink, and she's perfectly content. Or take any of us. We walk into the supermarket. We get to the shampoo aisle. There are, 150 bottles? And every one of them is making a different promise. Volumizing, whatever that means. Smoothing, color protecting, sulfate-free, for dry hair, for oily hair, for curly hair, for wavy hair. I have a little wave at the back, so maybe that counts for something. I need a particular kind of shampoo for that. Now I have to figure out what kind of hair do I have. On this day, in this season, at this time, is gray, light hair, and I just stand there and I get a little anxious. And then I just grab anyone, because the cognitive load of choosing is too much. Schwartz was writing about consumer choices, but I think his research explains something much bigger than that. I think it explains why we attach ourselves so tightly to the feeling of being right. Because, listen, I know is comforting. I think is uncertain, perhaps is anxiety producing. When I say I know, which is kind of self-comforting, self-soothing, the world snaps into focus. The ambiguity disappears. The cognitive load drops. My nervous system relaxes. When I say I think, I'm holding open the possibility that I might be wrong. And that is expensive. That costs energy. That keeps me alert. When I say perhaps, I'm essentially admitting that I'm in the fog and nobody likes the fog. So we reach for I know. I'll give you another example, an example of how deep I think this runs. I used to say the only person who needs to be certain in my life is, God forbid I need it, my surgeon. The surgeon needs to know, right? When my chest is open, when the scalpel's in his hand, I want him absolutely certain. I've since revised that thought, that belief. I want a surgeon who's humble. I want a surgeon who's curious. I want a surgeon who has read the morning's research. I want a surgeon who challenges his or her own assumptions and seeks the counsel of colleagues before he or she opens me up. The surgeon who's absolutely certain before the second imaging, before the consult, before the team conversation. Now that surgeon scares me a little. What I want from a surgeon, it turns out, is exactly what I want from a leader. I want from a partner. It's what I want from a friend. It's what I want from a stranger giving me advice in the back of a cab. Not certainty. Earned, earnest humility. And then, and this is what I really want you to hear, the modern world makes it dramatically worse. Because every news source you watch, every podcast you listen to, every social media feed scrolling under your thumb is engineered, now I'm choosing that word carefully, engineered to make you feel that what you already believe is correct. It's not an education system. It's an affirmation system. The algorithm is not neutral. It's like having an imaginary friend who's constantly patting you on your back saying, yes, Right, exactly. You are so smart. Look, here's another article that agrees with you. Look, here's another video. Look, here's another influencer who hates the same people, the same things that you hate. And every pat on the back makes the next pat on the back feel more necessary and eventually feel earned. The researchers call this many things: filter, bubbles, echo chambers. I want to call it something more understandable, simpler. I want to call it spiritual flattery. And it works. It works. Psychologists studying this current age, and they are working overtime to try and understand it for us, they've concluded that we now assume that we're right 82% of the time. 82%. Put that in baseball statistics. I want you to do something. I want you to look at the actual decision history of your own life, your personal decisions, your romantic ones, your investments, your predictions about the weather, the stock market, the election, the friend you were sure was solid, the friend you were sure was trouble. How often have you actually been right? 40%? 50%? But if we talk about feeling 82% confident, I should say, if we walk around with that feeling, 82% confident, that gap between how often we're right and how often we feel that we're right, that gap is where most of the damage in human life is happening. Faith isn't the same as certainty. I want to draw a distinction here. I think that our culture has collapsed to our great cost. I think the distinction between what I'm referring to as faith and what I'm referring to as certainty, these aren't the same thing. In fact, I would argue that they're closer to the opposites. Faith, in its highest form, is extraordinary. Faith is what allows a person to keep going when there's no evidence yet that things will improve. Faith is what built every cathedral, every synagogue, every mosque, every monument that has ever outlasted the person who designed it. Faith is one of the most beautiful capacities a human being possesses. I'm not against faith, certainly not. I'm a strong advocate for it. But faith in its lowest form, faith in falsehood, faith in a position that has been artificially reinforced until it appears as truth, that's something else entirely. That's a kind of zealotry. And right now in this age, I see a great deal of zealotry being mistaken for faith. The person who's certain, really certain, no doubt at all, is not necessarily a person of faith. Sometimes there's simply a person who has stopped asking questions. Real faith, and this is true wherever I have looked, across every serious tradition, includes wrestling. It includes argument. It includes doubt. In Judaism, the great rabbis disagree for pages and pages and pages and eras. The Talmud preserves the disagreement for pages and pages. The Talmud preserves both sides of arguments, not because they couldn't make up their minds, but because the wrestling is the point. They want us to see the wrestling, not just the solution or the question. In the Christian tradition, you have the book of Job from our tradition as well. You have the psalmists of lamentation. You have a man on a cross asking why God has forsaken him. In Islam, you have a prophet trembling, and at the first revelation, afraid he's losing his mind. In the Buddhist tradition, the warning is constant. The moment you think that you have arrived, you have not arrived. That shows up in Hasidic thinking in Judaism as well. And outside of religion entirely, the founding figure of Western philosophy, Socrates, said the only thing he knew for certain was that he knew nothing. Every serious tradition, every serious thinker builds the wrestling in. You take away the wrestling and you don't have faith, you have certainty. And certainty without curiosity is just zealotry waiting to happen. I'm telling you what I crave right now. I crave gentle curiosity. I crave conversations where neither person is trying to win. I crave a Thanksgiving dinner where nobody has been told by a cable news host or a podcast whom to disinvite. Have you noticed that? We're now being given explicit instructions by people we've never met about which family members or friends to cut out of our lives. And many of us abandoning each other, we're abandoning our intellect, we're abandoning our reason, our siblings, our parents, our lifelong friends, because we're right and they are wrong, and we are certain of it. So let's go back to the list I started with. Chernobyl and the Titanic and the Challenger and the Columbia and Deepwater Horizon. What do they have in common? In every single one of those disasters, and I mean in every single one, engineers, scientists, technicians, junior officers raised concerns. They flagged the issue. They wrote the memo. They made the phone call. And in every single case, somebody senior, somebody in charge, somebody who was certain overruled them. The reactor would be fine, they said. The iceberg warnings were overcautious. The O-ring would hold in the cold. The foam strike was nothing to worry about. The blowout preventer had been tested. Hundreds of people died because someone was certain. And here's the thing I want you to sit with. That same dynamic, the senior, certain voice overruling the quieter, humbler one, is not just at NASA. It's not just on an oil rig. It's at your dinner table. Your son tried to tell you something, maybe gently, maybe not so gently, maybe years ago, maybe last week, and you were certain, and you overruled him. And eventually, he stopped trying. Your daughter raised a concern about how you talked to her partner, and you were certain. So you overruled her. Your spouse said, I don't feel seen. And you were certain that you were a good spouse who saw them just fine. Every disaster has an architecture, and the architecture is always the same. Someone with quieter information, someone with louder certainty. And the loud certainty wins until eventually the bill comes due. In the biblical tradition, Moses, there's an extraordinary story in the book of Exodus that I love, and certainly in this context. Moses is leading 400,000 people out of slavery. 400,000. He's, without exaggeration, the busiest person in the Bible to that point. He's leading, he's prophesying, he's adjudicating every single legal dispute personally, and he has a wife and he has children whom he basically never sees. His father-in-law, Yitro, shows up at his tent. And here's the part of the story that I love, that I see in filmic terms. Yitro, the father-in-law, brings Moses' wife and children with him to the tent door. So the first thing Moses sees before a single word is spoken, it's just visual. Here's your family. Then Jethro speaks. But notice what Jethro doesn't do. He doesn't yell. He doesn't shame Moses publicly. He doesn't say a single word about Moses being a bad husband or father. What he does, he just says, and I'm imagining the tone here, gentle, observational. He says, essentially, I've been watching you. You are the busiest person that I have ever seen. Every dispute comes to you personally. Look at the line outside this tent. This isn't sustainable. Have you considered, and then he proposes what humans 2,000 years later would learn to call delegation. Let other judges handle the smaller cases. Let only the high court matters come to you. Now, here's what I want you to notice. Moses, the prophet, the man who has spoken with God face to face, the leader of a nation in Exodus, that Moses doesn't speak. The Torah doesn't record him pushing back. It doesn't record him explaining himself. It doesn't record him saying, listen, you don't understand my situation. You don't know how complex this is. The Torah simply tells us that he listened and that he adapted. He took his father-in-law's advice, and it worked. So, a cab driver telling a major league pitcher how to throw. A father-in-law telling a prophet how to lead, 2,000 years apart, but the same lesson. Listen to the person who has the perspective that you don't have, even if it's on you, especially if it's on you. Even if their job title doesn't impress you, even if you outrank them, even if your ego is screaming. So what's the practice here? Because if I just tell you be more humble, it's essentially useless. Wise but useless. That's a bumper sticker. I want to give you something real, a takeaway. The field is called intellectual humility. I mentioned that before, IH for short, if that's more helpful. And it's getting serious attention in psychology departments right now. The basic idea is this: walk into every situation, every meeting, every disagreement with the working assumption that you might learn something. Think about that. Not just that you might be wrong, something stronger than that you almost certainly have something to learn from the person or the people in that room, in that encounter, even if you don't yet know what it is. That's it. That's the whole practice. Now, does that sound easy? Try it for the next hour. Try it for the day. Try it tomorrow. Try it for the next argument with your partner. Try it in your next political conversation. Try it the next time someone whose opinion you usually dismiss starts talking. Try just for a few minutes to come into that moment, that encounter, that conversation, wanting to learn more than wanting to teach. You'll find out very, very quickly how rarely you actually do this. Now, before I tell you about the rewards, because we need to know there are rewards, I want to head off a misunderstanding, because when I describe intellectual humility, some people hear weakness. Some people hear just agree with everyone, don't have strong opinions, or be a doormat. That's not what I'm describing, clearly. It's not what I'm saying. Intellectual humility is not the absence of conviction. It's a conviction held with hands open instead of hands clenched. I have strong opinions. I have deep convictions. There are things I'm willing to fight for, but I try, and I don't always succeed, but I try to hold those opinions in a way that lets new information reach me. The opposite of intellectual humility is not strength. It's brittleness. The certain person looks strong, but certainty is a kind of armor. And armor is heavy, and armor cracks. The humble person can look softer. The humble people can update. Humble people can absorb new information. Humble people can change course without their identity collapsing. If I had to put my life in someone else's hands, I would take a humble person every time, because the humble person can be told that strategy isn't working and adjust. The certain person doubles down, and doubling down in the face of evidence is how disasters happen. And here's the part that I find most beautiful. The science backs this up. People who practice intellectual humility are happier. They have better relationships. And according to longitudinal research from Harvard, they tend to live longer lives. Now, I don't know what other inducement to offer you. You'll be happier. Your relationships will improve. You'll live longer. All you have to do is hold open in any given conversation the possibility that you have something to learn. Curiosity. There's a partner to intellectual humility, and I want to name it before we close. It's curiosity. If you think about that, I think of them as twin disciplines, two sides of the same posture. And here's something that I want to suggest you write down. If you're driving, pull over. But write this down. When you are genuinely curious, it's harder to be judgmental. And when you're being judgmental, it's harder to be genuinely curious. You can't be both at once. The mind that asks why might they think that is fundamentally different from the mind that has already decided they think that because they are stupid. One is a door, the other is a wall. And you and I get to choose in every single situation which one we walk into. Let me bring us back to where we started. A cab in San Diego, a pitcher who has just had the worst night of his career, a driver who looks in the rearview mirror and says, I think you should try bringing your hands over your head in the windup. Wade LeBlanc could have done what most of us would surely have done. He could have nodded politely, could have put in his earbuds. He could have said, thank you very much, man, and meant something else. Instead, and this is the part I find sacred and important, he assumed that the cab driver might know something that he, the expert, didn't know. He carried that assumption all the way to Tucson, all the way to the next start, all the way through the rest of his career. That's intellectual humility. That's curiosity. That's a story you can share. That's the rabbi's definition of wisdom, the one who learns from every person. I want to leave you with one question and one practice. And the question is, who has been trying to give you advice that you've been refusing to hear? It might be a colleague, it might be a child, it might be a spouse, it might be a cab driver, it might be the part of yourself that has been quietly trying to get your attention for years. Sit with that for a minute. And the practice, for 1 week, just one, try to enter every conversation with the assumption that you have something to learn. The assumption you have something to learn. That's it. You don't have to change your mind. You don't have to abandon your values. You don't have to become someone that you're not. You just have to leave the door open. If you do that, if you really do that, I think you'll find that some doors that have been closed for a long time start to open again. Well, that's our episode. I'm Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. This is The Meaning Mindset. It's season 3. And if something in this episode landed for you, share it with someone you love, someone you care about, especially someone you've been arguing with, maybe especially them. Maybe open a conversation as a result of this. I'll see you next time. I'd love it if you would hit subscribe. That supports us and allows us to continue this podcast episode after episode. This is now season 3. Thank you.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Li-Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Li-Paz. Digital marketing by Notebook Media. The Meaning Mindset is hosted by Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.